My name's Ian Alexander. I work for the Church of Scotland in what's now called International Partnership, which was once called World Mission, but everything changes. We're very delighted to have you all here, and I'm here in my role as chair of the Alexander Duff Missionary Lectureship Committee. And so Alexander Duff, for those of you who are not aware, was the first official missionary of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, sailing for what was then called Calcutta in October 1829, and 2 shipwrecks later arriving in May 1830. Some of us might have taken it, as the moderator suggested to me earlier, as a sign that this was perhaps not a divinely mandated mission. But once he was there, he put his focus on higher education and had a huge influence throughout Bengal and then beyond into the rest of India, not only amongst those who came to Christ, but in the development of a modern educational system in the subcontinent. He returned to Scotland in 1849 to take up what has been described as the first chair of missiology to be established anywhere in the world, here at New College. And Professor Emma Wildwood will cite her sources for you from her 2023 inaugural lecture, where she said that his lecturing style was synonymous with his name. Duff was active in encouraging the creation of the Alliance of Reformed Churches holding the Presbyterian system, now the World Communion of Reformed Churches, and he was twice moderator of the Free Church of Scotland. And after his death in 1878, using the proceeds of his personal property, which he had instructed to be used upon his death, his son William Pirrie and his daughter Rebecca Jane established in his memory this series of lectures and were active in choosing all the lecturers to be sure to continue their father's interests and to ensure full justice was done to his strong and earnestly held evangelical sentiments. The trust deed, fortunately, allows for a broad range of interests, and the trustees have liberty to choose a lecturer and a topic, such subject being within the range of foreign missions and cognate subjects. And so, just as an aside, as you realize, we're approaching the 200th anniversary of Duff's arrival in India, and the trustees are looking ahead and thinking how to mark this bicentenary in 2030. And so if you have any brilliant, innovative and exciting ideas for what we might do in 2030 for this lectureship, the trustees would be absolutely delighted to hear from you. There has been, of course, a very distinguished series of lecturers over the years, and you can see them all on the website that Alec Chow has very helpfully organized alongside the New College and the Centre website. And so now I'm delighted to hand over to Kyama Mugambi, who's going to introduce to us the latest in this distinguished series of lectures, Professor Jean Kidula. Thank you.
Thank you so much. World Christianity studies has never been far from music. Andrew Walls himself was a keen musician, and many here share a profound interest in music, or are once musicians, as I was. Serious study, though, of the long and complicated history of Christian experience around the world has always carried an implicit, if not always explicit, interest in music as a key component of the story. This year's conference theme, Popular Folk, Grassroots and Pop Culture in World Christianity and the History of Mission, acknowledges the critical importance of culture and creative culture in all its forms. In that spirit, this year's Duff Lecture warmly welcomes an exceptionally fitting dialogue partner into our conversation, Professor Jean Kidula. She's an distinguished ethnomusicologist and professor of music at the University of Georgia. She holds a PhD from University of California, having started her education in Nairobi, Kenya, where we both come from. Prior to joining UGA, she taught at Kenyatta University in Kenya and Pomona College. She was also the recipient of our one-year residential fellowship at the Institute of Sacred Music at Yale University, a prestigious honor recognizing her work in the field of music and religion. Professor Kidula has served on the boards of the Society for Ethnomusicology, the International Council for Traditional Music, and the Global Ethnodoxology Network, among other professional associations, a breadth of engagement that reflects both the reach of her expertise and the regard in which she is held across disciplines. Those of us involved in African studies will also recognize her valued contributions to the field. Her primary research sits at the rich and complex intersection of music, religion, and the music industry in Africa and its diasporas. Her monograph, Music in Kenyan Christianity, Lugoli Religious Song, out of Indiana University Press, is a landmark historical and cultural study of Christian religious music among the Lugoli of Western Kenya. She's also co-author of a very important volume, Music in the Life of the African Church, by Baylor University Press, which explores how music shapes African Christian theology. For our gathering this evening, her work on musical grassroots expressions, music histories, and the lived experience of communities of faith will resonate deeply. Her research spans indigenous popular music in Africa, gospel music in Africa and Sweden, African American religious music, and composition across the African diaspora. Yet for me, what makes Professor Kidula's scholarship so compelling is that it is inseparable from our life fully lived in music. She grew up making music in family, in school, in church, recorded her first album, those days on radio cassette, as we used to call it, with her sisters at the tender age of 14, a recording that we used to listen to on Kenyan radio. She went on to direct choirs and lead worship at NPC, now Christ is the Answer Ministries, one of Nairobi's most significant congregations, and later continued that ministry at Athens in Georgia. She's an accomplished instrumentalist, a composer, arranger, and has led ensembles across multiple contexts and continents. I've had the privilege of knowing Professor Kidula for many years and interacting with her musical and scholarly work, and I can say with confidence that few people bring to this podium both the scholarly depth and the lived musical wisdom that she carries. Please join me in welcoming Professor Jean Kidula.
Good afternoon. I'm now ready to die. Thank you, Kyama, for that introduction. And thank you all for being here. It is a great privilege for me to give this Duff Lecture. I'd actually never heard of it until I got an email from Emma Wildwood that I totally ignored because I was sure it was a fake. There is no way somebody's called Wildwood. So when she followed it up with another one, I thought maybe I should look at it at school because they have all these different ways that you can mitigate all those email spams. And so I looked at it, and then she mentioned Kyama, and then I was like, okay, this is a real person, not a fake person. So thank you very much for the invitation for this lecture and for this group of people that I'm getting to know and very, very excited to see what you do. I rarely get to share my research, especially from the academic perspective, beyond my musicology and ethnomusicology colleagues, so it's very special for me to be here. My primary research for the past 40 or so years has been on music and Christianity in Africa and its diaspora. That's a long history. most people don't think about it that way. So I just feel a little bit emotional to be talking to people who study history, who do religion, because it's like my worlds collide right here in this room. And it's really, really special. I also want to thank Reverend Dr. Ian Alexander for the invitation, and also to thank Dr. Alex Chow, who has just made my day today really, really special. Thank you very much. And for others who have lent their instruments and their expertise, thank you all very, very much. I feel privileged that I'm a musician and I have been a church musician. Most of the time, church musicians tend to set the stage, invite order, collect people, whether to invite them into a certain space or way of being, or to quiet them, or shut them up, or focus their attention, or prepare them, or help them to prepare for the main orator, whether that orator is a preacher, or a certain activity, or part of the order of a ritual. So to be invited to be like the main act when you're a musician, you've turned the world upside down. I will approach this presentation using narrative vignettes and musical examples drawn mostly from my experiences as a church musician and an academic, from my research and from my experiences in Kenya. I have been to other parts of Africa, and some of what I share may resonate with some of those parts of Africa, and some may not. It's a huge continent. I'll try to tie up the different narratives at the end, but just in case I don't, I pray that the Lord will bless you. For full transparency, I was nurtured in the classical Pentecostal tradition that emerged at the close of the 19th century. I was born and brought up in a Kenyan village, complete with all the cultural accoutrements, but also with a Pentecostal missionary presence. So we kind of lived some of our village life, not just me, but my whole village. We kind of lived in Ann-Pryor, Canada, because for my family, my parents worked with missionaries, and we were exposed to many interesting Canadian things. The worst one from my brothers was eating Jell-O. They did not like it. My grandfather was the pastor of the village Pentecostal assembly. He had originally been evangelized by the Salvation Army and Quakers, and then he had a Pentecostal experience. Later on, when I was 10 years old, I went to an all-girls boarding school. The first was run by Anglicans, and I learned liturgical behaviors and disciplines that I had never encountered in the village, and they were mostly in English. And I also learned a different language, which I continue to speak when I have to. The language is called Luo. My primary language is Lugoli. In Luo, I learned the Apostles' Creed. I didn't know there was an English version. The second school which I attended for 6 years was called Alliance Girls, because it had been set up by an alliance of Western missions. Our main hymn book was Hymns Modern and Ancient and Modern. That's what we used for chapel services. And this is where I also learned that the Apostles' Creed was in English, and there were other creeds that I'd never met before growing up Pentecostal. Also at the school, there were many other Christian denominations and entities that proselytized the school. And because it was an alliance of churches that had set it up, we sang different songs from different congregations in Kenya and beyond. I'll let you contemplate on the breadth of experiences that I encountered. And then, just after my first degree, I attended a Mennonite-run college in Goshen, Indiana. That was a completely different layering of belief and musical systems. When I arrived in Goshen, I was sure I was in 13th century Europe because of the cobblestones and the horses and the Amish. I knew I was dreaming. Meanwhile, as a music student, we encountered Catholic liturgical rituals and musics, and I came to the conclusion that when God reveals a facet of himself, there is not just a theological and doctrinal shift, there is a musical response as people grapple with how to handle the revelation and how it supports or questions previously held tenets. Think about it. The Reformation birthed new musics. The Great Awakenings birthed new musics. The Pentecostal and holiness movements, these were theological and doctrinal shifts. They birthed new music. And if you look at any country in the world where there has been some kind of Christian revival, there will be new music. So with the 1960s charismatic shifts, a wave of worship songs emerged. I want to begin by asking Kyama to come and sing one of them with me, but I also think that you all should join in to have a Pentecostal experience. As soon as you learn it,
you know this one. Okay. Good. Let's just say the words Hakuna Mungu kama wewe. Hakuna Mungu kama wewe. Hakuna Mungu kama wewe. There is no God like you. Hakuna Mungu kama wewe. Hakuna kama wewe. Hakuna Mungu kama wewe. Hakuna Mungu kama wewe. One more time, let's sing together. Hakuna Mungu kama wewe. Hakuna kama wewe. Hakuna Mungu kama wewe. Hakuna Mungu kama. Next verse. Hakuna nguvu kama zako. Hakuna no strength like yours. Kama zako. Hakuna nguvu kama zako. Hakuna nguvu kama zako. Hakuna mokozi. Hakuna mokozi kama wewe. Hakuna kama wewe. Hakuna mokozi kama wewe. No savior. Hakuna mokozi kama wewe.
you're now Pentecostally inclined. Yeah. Kyama was trying to give you the English translation. That's the English translation over there, if you didn't know it. And you can see that it's coming out of that worship movement where there was an emphasis on thinking about the attributes of God more than anything else. This song has many English translations, or the tune itself has lent itself to some English translations. And I'm just talking about how a small song like this, or this kind of lyric, starts at the grassroots and then expands to many different places in many different ways. So there is a song that has gained a lot of popularity today because of a Nigerian singer-songwriter called Nathaniel Bassey that has sung it on stages across the world and in the industry. And the tune is actually very, very close to what you just sang, but it is in English because he tries to reach a larger audience like that. So if you remember that tune, this is a very similar tune. I'm just talking about how music from the grassroots just grows, and the grass is like a weed that will expand in interesting ways. There is none who hears, O Lord. There is none beside thee. Neither is there anyone like our God. There is none holy as the Lord. Slight difference, yeah? But lyric very, very similar, and then he expands it. So grassroots are interesting places like that. If you ever Google this title on YouTube, you'll get a different tune that's attributed to a New Zealand singer-songwriter that worked with Maranatha for a while, but he was part of the Scripture in Song project. The project was incepted by Dale and David Garrett in the 1970s, where there was concern that people did not know Scripture. Song was therefore one way to memorize and therefore internalize Scripture. This was an interesting shift from earlier and continuing missionary efforts to translate the Bible into local languages so that people could read it for themselves. And that led to setting up of schools in the colonies and elsewhere. Still, many people didn't have access to literacy in the colonies. And meanwhile, in the West, people who had access to school had lost interest in reading the Bible, but they could listen to music. The songs that were set up by the project were in English. And this particular song, that text is inspired by 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 2, where Samuel was dedicating her son, who was born miraculously, and then she continued to have more children. God's miracles are strange. Yeah. So, and the tune is different. I'm just saying that, so if you go online, don't look for that particular version. That's a different version. But the text is the same. So text is important, but tune also speaks a different language in that sense. The Kiswahili word spawned other texts and other songs. For example, one of the most famous songs towards the end of the 90s was composed and sung by a Tanzanian musician called Fanueli Sedekia. He passed away very, very interestingly some years back. And the song, instead of just saying, Hakuna Mungu kama wewe, now he talks, is there a God like you? Ni nani kama wewe? Who is like you, O God? Who is like you? There is none. So you can see the link with 1 Samuel 2:2 to other verses like coming out of Exodus 15 that speak about the majesty of God. But because the text was very, very compact at the time, there was backlash or pushback by Swedish missionary children in Tanzania who wanted to elaborate on what separated the Christian God from all other gods, what made him stand out. So they composed another song that was also sung like that, based on that. It's a different tune. Hakuna Mungu kama wewe became very, very popular with groups of people who felt you just can't sing a compact song like that. You have to explain it. And if you think about multiculturalism, there are some people who may not understand what you say when it's very compact because they don't have the history that you have to the thing. So they want you to elaborate and to explain it more. So you can see that the labor of song in Christian discourse is well played out just in these few examples. And you can think of other examples in your own experiences where one text has created more songs based on the text, or one tune has created new texts to those old, to the old tune in that way. What's special for me also about being here is because I invoke some of the work of Andrew Walls on world Christianity in my research. My research trajectory literally was changed after I read the works of two of Walls' former students who also studied with Lamine Sané when they both taught at the University of Aberdeen. Is that how you say Aberdeen? Yeah. The two were Ezekiel Kasiera and Kwame Bidiako. Bidiako graduated from Aberdeen in 1983, and his work forced me to reflect on how culture and the times we live in influence our reading, translation, interpretation, and application of Christianity, regardless of where that culture is located in time and space. Modern Africa was compelled to accept Christianity through the lens of Western, European, or American cultural lenses and tunes and times. But there were also indigenous expressions that spoke the people's languages and needs. And these expressions were viewed in various ways by the West or by those who had embraced the Western lens, whether they understood what they had embraced or not. Kasera, on the other hand, who graduated from Aberdeen in 1984, was the first to write about classical Pentecostalism in Kenya. He did not write a positivist thesis. He wrote a very interesting historical work. In fact, one of the critiques was on my dad. And when I read it, I was like, what? But it was a very groundbreaking critique that made me think about things that I had taken for granted growing up. He wrote about the history and development of Pentecostal Assemblies of God, and his research filled in many gaps as I explored music in Logoli Christianity through time. And looking at it not just from the Pentecostal lens, but from the Quaker lens, because Quakers were also very, very active among the Logoli, and also forced me to think about an interdisciplinary approach to thinking about music, not just about the notes and analyzing the text, but there's more behind music than just that. And I'll share some of my findings later. Yesterday, when I arrived in Edinburgh, my first reaction was laughter. My first maths teacher in high school, Mr. Dugan, was Scottish. I was thinking about him. He made my whole class of 32 girls fall in love with maths. We were not going to fail maths. We were girls, but we were not going to fail maths. When he first entered our classroom of mostly 12 to 14-year-olds, we looked at him in shock. He was tall enough, but he had these legs. They were not what we were expecting. He was kind of bow-legged. Then he opened his mouth, and we were completely sure he was not well. He spoke a form of English. It sounded like English, but it was clothed in a different accent. Then he told us he was Scottish. That actually didn't help. As far as we were concerned, he was British, and that was not British English. He clearly was enjoying this whole drama because he had a twinkle in his eyes. And then he told us to get used to his accent because he had to get used to our accents. We came from different parts of Kenya, and we all had our Englishes. Mr. Dugan also came to class with a big dog. It was a German Shepherd. It was about 4 feet something, and I'm still 4 feet something. Most of us did not have a good experience with dogs, specifically white people dogs. This is in the 1970s. Kenya was newly independent. We knew that white people trained their dogs to chase black people unless you worked for them. So we were terrified of the dog. He saw the terror in our eyes and told the dog to go and sit outside the class door. We were just looking at him in shock because the dog actually listened to him and went out there. But now we were trapped. We could not escape to the bathroom or anywhere through that door with the dog sitting outside. His eyes were twinkling. Then he started to teach us. I really don't remember how he taught, but I know that we all enjoyed maths class. We looked forward to it, and we knew that he loved us. Eventually, we became friends with the German Shepherd. That was very good for my class. We were 12 to 14-year-olds and had other teachers and students we did not particularly like. Meanwhile, we had access to Mr. Dugan's dog. I will not elaborate on my class's exploits, much to the amusement of Mr. Dugan, but it was not a good thing. But for us, Mr. Dugan represented Scotland more than the country dancing and the bagpipes and the folk songs that we were learning in school instead of the songs of our own cultures. The songs and hymns we sang in music and chapel included songs like The Lord is My Shepherd, and we sang, I don't even know how to say this, but we sang it. The Loch Lomond? Yeah, we sang that. We knew lyrics. We did not know what they meant, but we sang them with steam. And sometimes when Christianity was introduced to Africa, people behaved that way. They were forced or locked in reserves. They could not get out. They had to learn the songs that came with the missionaries and the colonial government. The songs were in a different accent. They did not understand the religion. But they came to love those songs the way we came to learn to love Scottish songs that are part of our experience growing up, even if other people don't understand why we actually still sing them. I had a different experience at home in the village. My grandfather, like I said, was a Pentecostal pastor. My father was a Pentecostal reverend. My mother was probably more Pentecostal than my dad. She's still alive. She's 95 years old, almost. My parents made sure that we sang a lot. They were translating songs, and they always tried those translations on us. And the Pentecostal songs that we sang were different from the ones that I sang in the Anglican or the Presbyterian hymns at school. But in addition to the Christian culture in the village, we also had a village culture. So we had folk songs, not just in my language. My village was made up of people from different other language groups. So we had these other songs that we had to sing as well, because we were locked in the village with Mr. Dugan's dog in the name of different kinds of political systems that were there. Because of our Pentecostal beliefs and our cultural heritage, sometimes we were overcome with song. That is sometimes difficult for people who have never had that experience to think about. How can you be overcome with song? The songs were expressions of our belief, of our experiences, of our faith. It was personal songs that we engaged in the moment. We couldn't resist the song, so we were overcome by it. Being overcome with song also meant that we looked at what the lyrics did and what the song style did. The lyrics could be a declaration, an affirmation, a testimony, a doctrine, a scripture, a joy, a remorse, a cry for mercy. We sang softly and we sang loudly. Sometimes we were overcome not just with songs that we made up, we were overcome with songs that we already knew, that were composed by other people. But sometimes we were so overcome with song that we made up the songs ourselves. Sometimes people responded to a song that one other person composed, and then they took it up and it became a congregational song. I have an example from my language. The title that I have there says, "When I prayed," or "When I sought," or when I ran. These are the lyrics. The first side of the lyrics is what the singer says when they start singing and the congregation starts to encourage the person or ask a question. So, Rwanda Asava, Danyora Roho, hallelujah. They respond like that. So the song, Rwanda Asava, Danyora Roho, hallelujah. Rwanda Asava, Danyora Roho, hallelujah. Muliro Kurio, Kulisamba, hallelujah. So you can see there's dialogue going on, and the person is being encouraged to continue with the narrative as they overcome with song. This song, I completely remember when it started in a meeting in the village. It was received in what was called in the spirit, or at least the first part of it was. The congregation, of course, has a role responding in true cultural fashion. The leader has the text. The congregation prompts him to continue the narrative by asking or commenting. However, other verses were added later. They were commenting on why there were some who would have a different fate. Those who are not filled with the Spirit of God. They will not be filled with the Spirit of God. And for those ones, there will be fire. There will be fire prepared. Muliro gurio, gulisamba bai, hallelujah. There is fire. They will be burned. The text is actually interesting. I was looking at it and I was like, people misunderstand a whole bunch of things. One of the texts says, those who prostitute themselves will be burnt in the fire. You are familiar with preachers of brimstone and fire, right? And the natural inclination is to think about prostitution in terms of sexual stuff. But those who are singing it were not just speaking about that kind of canon knowledge. They're also talking about people who stray from the way, or who do what is not lawful, or who go where they should not go. They find themselves with a different result. It's not just about hell. There is an immediate result. They find themselves in hot water. If you're hanging around with somebody's wife and they find you, I'm sure that is hell. So while there are stories about brimstone and fire that were highlighted by a surface reading of the text, there was a very real and present consequence. And of course, there was debate in and out of Christian circles about the efficacy or implications of the text, the compactness of the tune, as compared to Western hymns, the performance practice. The general response demonstrates our desire to understand God on our terms, in our language, actual or musical or artistic, in our time, dictated by whoever has political, social, or cultural authority. But God is more vast than that. God is more vast than that. One of my mother's favorite songs was a song that says, how big is God? How big and vast and wide his vast domain. To try to tell, these lips can only start. He's big enough to rule the mighty universe and small enough to dwell within my heart. There's a tendency to think that God's revelation is according to our understanding of revelation. This song, and why I mentioned my mother, is because I was asked by some Pentecostal people to write about a Pentecostal woman, a classical Pentecostal woman, and the only one I knew was my mom. So I've been doing a whole bunch of research on her, archival research and other things like that. And I'm kind of surprised that at 20 years old, she was doing crazy things that I can't even imagine doing in this time when people are kind of funny. But she also worked with music, a lot of music. In fact, both of my parents used music to demonstrate how a particular doctrinal stance mutates over time. They changed music, they taught us new styles all the time. Before my parents began their work in missions, and they worked with children and youth and adults in denominational administration, most songs were translated from Western resources of different kinds. How do I know? I have been looking at most classic Kiswahili hymnals or booklets from the late 19th century. If you look at the subtitles, the hymn subtitles tend to have an English underneath it, if you can see that. So I have a Swahili text on one side, English text on one side, I need the every hour. And then I have the Kiswahili translation. This is coming out of a hymnal called Nyimbo Standard that was published in 1897 by the Church Missionary Society. It was compiled in 1897. There was a revised edition in 1914, another revised edition in 1931 that after that, they expanded it in 1931 and then it got stuck in 1931, so they've just been reproducing the old one since 1931. But apart from that Nyimbo Standard, there are many, many hymnals in Swahili that were put up by different denominations. I just brought samples in case you want to look at them. I have some samples here, like Nyimbo za Injili, that was published by a Pentecostal publishing house, but it serviced more than the Pentecostals. It serviced different kinds of churches. And then I have another one that was put up by the Baptist Convention of Kenya, who were actually quite late on the scene. They came in the 1950s, Nyimbo za Sifa, and usually you would see the title of the title, the English title, but sometimes you also had the solfege underneath so that you'd know the exact tune to use like that, because some hymns had more than one tune in that sense. The dominant texts and sonic resources, therefore, were from these hymns. So this is an example of a song supplement called CA Songbook. It looks like this. Young men singing on it. You can come and look at it afterwards. I found a really old copy in an archive, and they gave it to me. I don't know why they gave me the archival resource, but they gave it to me. And they have song lyrics of hymns, but in the back, you have these translations of choruses. And what I wanted you to notice is that the chorus has a Swahili translation with it. So when people would sing, they would not just sing the English version, they would sing the Swahili and the English version, the Swahili and the English version. So that today, when you go to some African churches, people are singing in more than one language almost all the time, because we got into the habit of having these translations with a major colonial language and then with other languages like that. I'm only talking about Kiswahili because there are other songs in other languages like that. But on top of just having these translations like that, I had, you can see this one was kind of very entertaining for me to look at. I have the music over there. Those of you who read music, the tune of the Maragoli translation has nothing to do with the tune of the English piece, but the subtitle says that's the tune. So when I looked for the tune, it's very, very different. And the text also kind of has something to do with that text, but it is not that text at all. It's based on that text, but it is not that text. That was kind of very funny for me to look at, because this particular text was used to teach children about the eyes and the ears and the legs and the mouth, like that. It was a pedagogical tool for the children at that time. So that was kind of interesting in that sense. My last point is it's too much to talk about, so I'm trying to see I was trying to figure out how to narrate this story so you can see where the grassroots has a huge history. Many people think that grassroots music in Africa began with the worship movement. No, there's a big history that comes from the 19th century, literally, in many, many different African countries in that sense, like that. My last example is a song called The Solid Rock. Some of you may know it. The most known tune, and the one that I grew up singing in the village, was the Bradbury tune. Some of you are nodding your heads. You know that tune? Yeah. But I told you that I went to an Anglican school, and they had other tunes. Some of you know that tune? Yeah, we sang it to those texts as well. And that has, if you start to do hymnology, there's a whole discipline over there. I don't have time to go to it like this. So you have all these things that you have in there. But what was interesting about this song that has made its way into a lot of Western hymnals is that there were new tunes that were now created. You can see the solfege on the bottom. It tells you what tune you're going to use. This is from Nyimbo za Sifa, the version from Nyimbo za Sifa, like that. So all the 4 verses over there, like that, and the source of it. And they even tell you what key you should sing it in. I played it in F. I should have played it in G. And I discovered as I traveled around the world that the Swedish sing lower than the British. And like literally, they pitch it lower than the British in the hymnals. It's down to about E flat in the Swedish hymnal, like that. So those are interesting cultural differences for me as a musician, like, whoa, pitch is also culturally interesting in that sense, if you'd never thought about that like that. But this Swahili version started to have new tunes that emerged for different kinds of reasons. I'll just give you 2 of the tunes that emerged for different reasons. One tune emerged because there was a movement in Britain in the 1970s to create new tunes for old texts so that they can modernize. So we used to sing, "Oh Jesus, I have promised to serve you to the end." And then suddenly, our teacher came to class and said, "You can't sing that anymore, it's an old tune." So now we have to sing, "Oh Jesus, I have promised to serve you to the end." Completely different tune. These are movements in the 1970s in Britain, and they were translated into the colonies. So the Anglicans in Kenya created another tune for the Swahili version of the song, based on a pop song. So, the tune they created was very different, right? Speaking the language of the people. But on top of that, a more popular tune emerged from the Pentecostal groups and the Baptist groups and other evangelical groups. That has made its way into Western hymnals and other hymnals around the world in the Swahili version. Kyama, you can come and sing it. put this translation here because that was originally an American hymn, gospel song, technically, that was translated into Kiswahili, went back to America. You're talking about African missionizing? Went back to America with that tune. This American called Greg Shear retranslated the Kiswahili version into English. And the text on this side that you see is the retranslation of the hymn into English. So it's going around. But the meaning is slightly different because the times have changed. As they understand the lyric of that piece, it changes the meaning like that. And this is just one example of songs that work in that way, where it goes somewhere, comes back, changes text, changes tune, changes text, and revises and revisits in different ways like that. I don't really have time to expound on why this particular text in Kiswahili became very, very popular. I've talked to a lot of people who use it because I do that kind of research, and I ask them, why did you think that this text speaks to the heart of the people in that way? To the extent that when they sing it with this new tune, other people are excited by the tune, attracted to the text, retranslate it into a different language like that. It's a very, very interesting piece of research that I've been doing over time like that. But I have to stop. so you have time to maybe have comments or think about it. Let me just reiterate what I said in the beginning. It seems to me that when God reveals or affirms a particular facet of himself, new songs or new expressions of old songs emerge. The statement or labor is most visible when grassroots or lay people take it upon themselves to be the expositors or the carriers of faith, or the people to whom that faith becomes personal. And then that piece enters regular cultural spaces and expands beyond the official clergy or even the music industry. The singing of the people denotes their encounter with, understanding of, experiences, and more with God. It is time to sing. This time, I must sing.